All right, I'm going to show you how to draw Huey Freeman from the Boondocks. I tried to set up the camera so that it wasn't so slanted. There's a slight slant, but you'll get the idea. So the first thing we're going to do is block out the main shapes. His head is pretty much circular. There's some angles to it, but we'll refine it along the way. But the main point being, it's about as wide as it is tall. Now, a big part of drawing from a reference is constant checking of relationships. So, you know, the relationship of the width to the height would be the most basic version of that. But as we refine the different shapes, we're going to have to keep making corrections, as you will see. So your brain is going to deceive you into thinking this shape of his face is bigger than it actually is. You might want to draw it huge, but if you block it off into a grid, you'll notice that it really only fills up the bottom left quadrant. And so you can use this method when you start out. Eventually you'll be able to do it in your head, but it's a good way to visualize it and work against your brain's deceptiveness. So the shape of his face, it's almost a straight line down here, and then about 2/3 of the way down, the shape of his face changes into a little triangle. You want to check the angles of your lines. A lot of time your brain will try and slant them. So if you want to check, you can always just lay your pencil and look at the direction your pencil is in. We're looking at about 330. So that way you can check your angles, make sure they look right. And again, don't be afraid to put lines down. You can always erase them. And then we have his ear, which is, again, you'll probably want to draw it bigger than it actually is. So it's just a matter of checking those relationships, like how big is it in relation to his face. And that looks about right. But again, we can always fix it if we need to. Kind of a cool little shape there. All right, so we've got the basic shapes there. I think it'll also be helpful to block out this two-tone on his hair. He's got kind of a halo, and this space is bigger than this space, so we can kind of use that to gauge the relationship between the face and the hair. All right, so now we're gonna do the same thing, but we're gonna zoom in on his face. One thing that's helpful for me is imagining the shape of the head in 3 dimensions and kind of imagining the shape of it so that I can consider this curve as we draw his features so that it doesn't end up flattening out. And so you can draw your guide on here to help if you want. And again, this is something that will eventually end up being something you can do. You can eyeball it in your head. That's pretty close, and we'll of course erase that later. And as you go, you can clean up your lines just to make it easier to see what you're doing. All right, so the eyes kind of fall right in the middle of his head there. And this eye, notice how skinny it is. You're probably going to want to draw it fatter than it is, but it might be easier to draw this whole shape first. It comes to about yay high and ends up down here. So we've got a nice big swooping oval, kind of flattened here. Again, check the angles to make sure that it's in the right direction, which is especially important with eyebrows because that communicates so much about the character's expression. And then break this oval down a little bit more for the eye. And we've got his little eyelashes. And then big irises. All right, so it's not quite, but we'll fix it once we get this other eye in and we can gauge more of the relationships and whittle it down. I like to kind of think of it as sculpting. There's adding and taking away and adding and taking away. And at the end, the image is revealed. All right, so we'll go for the other eye now. I'm thinking that this is a little too far out, so I might not use that as a guide for placement. I'm going to use the other eye. Now notice how the eyebrows kind of don't, this one's a little higher like that. And then this eyebrow kind of lines up here with that one. And then we've got a nice big, see this line is going to about 1 o'clock. And then it curves. Your brain's going to tell you that this is a flat line, but it's not. It's tilting up 2 o'clock there. So, and it doesn't quite meet the edge of the face. That'll help me with that line. I was struggling with this distance here, but this helps define where that's supposed to be. All right, so now we're going to just real quick check the relationship between this eyebrow and this one. It looks pretty good. The eyebrow kind of ends right about here in the eye. That looks good. All right, we'll try and add this other eye in now. Kind of lines up with the other top here. And that's going to come down right there. So the eye is kind of round, but it's got kind of a ruby shape. Flat top. And it comes out to about where the eyebrow ends right here. Kind of dips down. Now looking at this, I think that it's a little bit too short, so I'm just gonna pull that down a little bit. And we're not really gonna know if it's right until we add the iris in, because that can deceive you also. It's about half the size of the eye. It's a bit too big. All right, looks pretty good. And again, we'll do a second pass on this and refine it further. So it doesn't have to be perfect. That looks pretty close. All right. Now the nose and mouth are pretty much just an extension of this shape here. So if you're trying to think of it like expanding the oval down, I think his face is not quite as flat as I've drawn it there. So he's got this lip right here. It barely comes out. And then tiny line, whoops. And then the nose falls right about in between the eye and the mouth. Now I'm noticing that I think I put the mouth a little too low, because when I check it with the relationship to the eye here, it's off. So I'm going to adjust that before I commit to this nose, because the placement of the nose is going to depend on the mouth. So yeah, it was a little off because he's got more chin there than I had given him. I've got a shadow under here that may have thrown me off. Okay, that looks more accurate. And okay, so now I can go back in and look at this nose shape. It's got a shadow underneath. That's going to help give it some dimension. All right, I'll erase some more of my guides and just check these relationships again, make sure we're on the right track. So this looks pretty good. This line is a bit messy and I can't really tell if I've got the shape of the face right. So I'm just gonna go back in and draw it with a little more care, a little cleaner. And try and get that shape right now that I've got all the features in there. And this is the part where practice just comes in as far as being able to control your line. And as I'm doing this, my eyes are constantly going back to the reference and checking. So as you can see, I've made that lip a little bit too big. I'll just bring it in a little bit. All right, it's looking pretty good. I'll take note of the shape of the face here. Check your angle. All right, so now you'll notice that this line never quite comes up here. It's taken over by this shadow. So go ahead and draw that shadow line in here. Comes to the very, very edge of that eyebrow. And it's just a straight line down. And a nice curve at the end. Now we can kind of color in this, and now this shape here makes a little more sense. It's easier to get it down. See, it's like sculpting it, just sanding it away until it looks right. Still a little flat right there. You'll notice that your brain is just constantly trying to tell you that you're doing it wrong, and you just have to be like, no, but this is what I see. You gotta think about the shapes that you're seeing, not what your brain thinks a face looks like. Okay. I'm gonna color in the rest of this shadow and help define the shape of his hairline. And let's go ahead and place in this neck here. Comes about a third and falls in line here. It's got kind of a curve to it, and add it into this shadow here. And see, the edge of the face kind of just comes around. And then the angle of the neck. And then for his shirt, the shape kind of mirrors his face, see? So comes down and swoops down to where his nose lines up. Then the collar kind of does a little curve here. You can see how the shape of the collar and the shape of this curve here gives an indication of the form of his back. And about that. Okay, so starting to emerge Huey from this jumble of lines. Okay, so let's get this ear down. So in relation to the rest of his face, it forms kind of the edge of the triangle here. So something like this. So I had it pretty accurate when I laid down the basic shapes. Not only do you want to think about this shape, you also want to think about this shape of the hair. Because if the ear looks right, but the hair doesn't, I mean, it's not right. All right, so the hair looks right, although the bottom of his ear is supposed to be matching up here. So let's see where I went wrong. I think what happened is, see the angle of this ear right here? I've got it tilted the wrong way. It's supposed to come down a little past 6 o'clock. And then I was also drawing this part of the ear too small. We can go ahead and see where it meets at the bottom. And just connect the lines. And the hairline comes, or the sideburn comes way down. All right, so let's check our shapes. Looks pretty good. Looks like this needs to come out just a little bit. And this down just a little bit. All right, the inside of the ear, this printout is not very clear, but it looks like there's like a line about here. But we do have a shadow on there, so let's go ahead and just color that in lightly. And you don't have to draw the shadows in. I think it helps communicate the form and will make the image more lifelike, but you can also just color it later if you want to. Okay. All right, so now let's go back to the hair. Now we've got our face all laid out, and it looks pretty accurate. I think I still need to bring this out some more. I don't know why I'm so reluctant to do that. All right. Cool. So the hair starts way down with the shirt, right? And as we're doing this, you want to check the shape of the negative space, which is the empty space, as well as the shape within the line. So first, let's just block it out a little bit more. And I kind of do like a feel thing. I just kind of like push the pencil like in and out. As I follow the line here, I kind of just feel it out on this end. And just eyes constantly going back and forth. All right, here's the bottom of where our two-tone shadow lies. So we'll just kind of reinforce that shape. And you'll notice that as I'm doing all this rough sketching, it's a really loose grip on the pencil and it's very light on the paper. Not necessarily keep the line light, although that makes it easier to erase and stuff, but it also just gives it a light flow on the paper so you can kind of massage the shape with the line, if that makes sense. All right, so this distance right here is going to be important, so keep an eye on that. See where the hair comes out of his cheek here. So a little too far down. Now the good thing about his hair is it doesn't have to be exact. I mean, there's definitely a quality to the way it's drawn that would make it recognizable. So you want to be pretty close, but you know, no one's got the divots of his hair memorized. I don't know, super fan maybe. Okay. Just go back and erase some of my messiness. All right. Now I'm going to just indicate the value of his hair, just like coloring in the shadow. And you can do this in a number of ways. You don't have to do it even. If you're using color, you would just use different shades of a color. But I like to just kind of and in order to, you can use the lines to indicate the texture of whatever it is you're drawing. You can also use the different angles of pencil strokes to kind of indicate the various directions his hair might be going in and keep it from looking like a flat field of space. All right, I'll come back and finish that in a minute. Okay, let's refine some of his facial features. His eyebrow is pretty pointed, so I'll just clean that up a little bit. The thickness of his eyebrow, you can kind of measure that and then use some other indication of the scale. So the very inside part of his eyebrow is almost as long as the line of his nose, and so, you know, if you want to get really detailed about it, you can do that. Just going to kind of eyeball it. And as you're thickening it, you can use that opportunity to fix any mistakes in the angle that you have. Okay, and same on the other side. Constantly checking our relationships. It's a little skinnier than this one because it's on the side. And carry it down. All right, now I've got a thinner line where the eye is. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a bold line there. And really define that shape. Pretty close. I think I made it a little too small, but hey. We'll draw in our iris here, and you'll notice there's a, just like eyebrows, any minuscule difference in the eye can really affect the angle, the direction of where they're looking and stuff. You end up having cross-eyed characters sometimes. So pay attention to, we've got some white space here. Think about what that shape looks like. Again, I've made my eye a little too thick of a line there. Okay. So starts about here. Very, very close to the bottom, but just enough white space to see. And then we've got highlight and a pretty vague indication of the pupil over the iris, but again, that's going to communicate a lot about where he's looking and his expression. You want to get pretty close. And finally, we've got shadow like on the ear, just falling over this part of the eye. About so. Okay. Erase some of these guides here. Now, as I check this second eye, I'm noticing that I've added, it's a little more angular in my drawing. This one, there's not really much of a peak there. It kind of just continues to turn around. So I'm going to correct that. It's pretty close there. And it kind of has a curve that mirrors the end of the eyebrow. And as far as the size, I was pretty close. I think I was a little small, so I'll go down a little further. Check that relationship. And the bottom of the eye comes up a little bit at the bottom, a bit of an angle. And then swoops up to a pretty shallow point. And I've got a nice angular top there. All right, clear out the eye and give that another shot. So we start not quite halfway in. It touches the eye at the bottom, and we've got a sliver of white space over here. But it just barely touches at the bottom. Nice curve there. And drawing this line here. And it's just this line, but offset basically. And we've got a highlight in the eye. And there's a shadow that falls over the eyeball, but you can see his pupil peeking out right about there. All right, now we do have some more shadow. Kind of starts right about here, cuts down. Carries over the eyeball. And then The shadow here indicates the shape of his brow and gives his face some dimension. All right, so I think I've got all the shadows. I noticed that I think I made his face a little flat there. Maybe it was better before. Okay. And just gonna wrap up the hair. And ideally you would have a darker shade for this part so that you could differentiate between the shadow of the face and the hair. But you could definitely go over that. All right. And since it's all kind of dark, this is where I would typically go over the lines with a pen. Refine those lines that we've perfected. And there he is, Huey from Boondocks.